Welcome back, life science learners. In our lesson today, we're revising photosynthesis. It's important that when we do this section that you recollect all the basic concepts. We've looked at the different reactions, we've looked at the various factors that affect them. Now let's apply that to a few questions. So guys, question 4 reads, look at these. Let me go back to the question, make sure I've got my pen on. Let's see. Look at these two reactions which take place in living organisms. The first reaction A shows you oxygen plus glucose, and that shows you the products producing carbon dioxide and water and energy being released. Reaction B below that shows you the reactants which are carbon dioxide and water using light energy, and the products that are produced are oxygen and glucose. So guys, I think there are subtle hints that are given in this, and if you look at it, you can clearly see that it's pointing to two very important processes. Yes, we are looking at photosynthesis. However, we need to acknowledge that often, as I mentioned earlier on, that photosynthesis and cellular respiration are often processes that happen in plants, and these can be studied together or can be questioned as we see together. So let's put on that cap of remembering that we also can refer to cellular respiration when we are testing you on photosynthesis. So it's important that we bring that knowledge and carry it through even the application to photosynthesis. Let's read further into the question. 4.1 reads, which of the two reactions take place in both plants and animals? Now guys, before we get into trying to answer that question, what we should have done was, as we looked at these, let's try and figure out which of these points to photosynthesis and which points to respiration. The giveaway in this diagram is showing you light energy. And guys, we know that light energy is required for a process of photosynthesis. And we can check that again. So here we've got photosynthesis that takes place. Let's run a further check. We know that for photosynthesis we need carbon dioxide and water, and the products of photosynthesis would be glucose. Is that correct? Yes. So certainly that is photosynthesis. Let's check the reaction above that. In this reaction we need oxygen and we need glucose, and we know that oxygen and glucose are required in a process called cellular respiration. So that obviously points to the process of cellular respiration, and I'm just writing down respiration for now, and that produces energy at the end. And interestingly, that energy molecule we've been discussing is in the form called ATP. Okay, so I hope that whilst annotating this diagram that some of our answers would have come up for the questions to follow. So getting back to our question, which of the two reactions take place in both plant and animals? Now guys, as I mentioned, photosynthesis happens exclusively in plants. Respiration happens in plants and animal cells. However, photosynthesis does not happen in animals. We refer to them as your heterotrophs. So in this case, the reaction, which is respiration, happens in both plants and animal cells. So the answer to this would be respiration, and that would be again something that happens in plants and animal cells. 4.2. Which of the two reactions take place only in plants? And guys, again, we know that photosynthesis is a chemical process that occurs exclusively in plants and in some bacteria. So in this case, it would be this reaction B, which would be only in plants. So it's going to be reaction B, and that would be the process of photosynthesis. Right. Okay, so next question, 4.3. Which reaction represents photosynthesis? So we just did that. So the reaction that represents photosynthesis, as I mentioned, was reaction B, and that is again indicated by this reaction using energy from the sun. Question 4.4. Name one substance used up in reaction A. So if we look at reaction A, we know that it shows you that oxygen and glucose are needed. So the substance that is used up would either be glucose or oxygen, as those are the both are products or reactants in this reaction. So I would answer that by saying, well, it could be oxygen or glucose. And as you can see from that reaction, both of those reactants are needed for the next part of the reaction. 4.5. Which of the two reactions can only take place in daylight? And we've got to give a reason for your answer. Guys, as I mentioned, we can look at this process here. It requires light energy. And we know that photosynthesis happens only during the day. And that is, it requires the energy from the sun to be able to carry out the light-dependent phase. So the reaction that takes place only during the day would be reaction B. We also need to provide a reason for this, and the reason would be that the energy from the light is required in being able to split up the water molecules, which then release the hydrogen, and that hydrogen is used in the next process of photosynthesis, which is the light-independent phase. So it can only take place in the presence of light, and that's because you need the energy from the radiant energy to split up water molecules. Let's look at 4.6. What is the source of water in reaction B? Now guys, the source of water in reaction B, think about that. Plants absorb water from their roots. And so the source of water will be the groundwater or the water from the soil. And that is the water that gets up to the leaves through the xylem vessels, and it's able to be used for that chemical reaction which is split up using light. Right, and finally question 4.7. What is the source of the glucose in reaction A? So we see that glucose in reaction A is a requirement for cellular respiration. That glucose is produced during photosynthesis, and it comes from either the process of photosynthesis where the glucose is stored in the form of starch, or is used immediately in the cell for a process which we refer to as respiration. Right, so I think we've gone through quite an elaborate question with very simple comparisons between the two. Let's look at the next question. Question 5. Investigating gas bubbles released, and that's the concept. The diagram on the next slide illustrates an investigation in progress. The distance between the light source and the apparatus have been altered at regular intervals to record the number of bubbles released at various distances. The data that's generated has been represented in a table. Study the diagram and the data table to answer the questions which follow. So let's move on to the next slide. And so that's the setup that has been provided. We see that there's a plant that's present in a glass vessel. There's a source of light, and as we mentioned in the question, that this source of light, the distance from the plant can be varied, and this process shows you that the water plant produces gas bubbles during the process of photosynthesis, and those gas bubbles are either measured or counted. We see that the water contains sodium bicarbonate in it. So that's the information that has been provided. Let's look at the data table which comes up further on in the question. 4.1. What is the function of sodium bicarbonate ions? Okay, so guys, when we look at the presence of sodium bicarbonate, we know that in this case plants require carbon dioxide for photosynthesis. We also know that they produce oxygen. So why would the investigator put in sodium bicarbonate into the source of water? Think about it. It's going to be used to increase the concentration of carbon dioxide in the water. Why would we want to do this? We would want to provide the necessary raw materials so that the plant is able to photosynthesize. Remember that this is a closed system, so it's just a single aquatic plant that is in it. And so in terms of making the air in the water more saturated or filled up with carbon dioxide, we provide a source of carbon dioxide, which is in the form of sodium bicarbonate. And this ensures that the plant now has an adequate amount of carbon dioxide to carry out photosynthesis. The next question reads, name the gas released during this experiment. So guys, if you look up here, you can clearly see that these bubbles are being produced. We know that during the process of photosynthesis, oxygen molecules or oxygen as a gas is released. So these bubbles that you're looking at that are being produced from the leaves are oxygen bubbles. And so if you did that, well done. 5.3, provide a suitable hypothesis for the above experiment. Guys, it's important that we recognize that when we write a hypothesis, it must contain the independent and the dependent variable. It was also linked to the aim of the experiment. Let's recall what the aim of the experiment was. In this case, we were looking at the effect that changing the distance of the lamp would have on the rate of photosynthesis. And in that means that if we think of the distance of the lamp, it means the light intensity. So if we string that together into a hypothesis, we could have the following. The closer or further the lamp is, the faster or slower the rate of photosynthesis will be. So guys, I've given options in my answer. So what we're saying is that the closer the light is, the greater the number of bubbles will be produced, or the further away the light, the fewer the number of bubbles will be produced. If you take note of that, I've referenced the independent variable, which would be the distance of the light source, and I've also mentioned the number of bubbles being the dependent variable. And I think that's important when you string together a hypothesis, that you remember it must have the independent, dependent, and link that to the aim of the experiment. 5.4. Explain a simple test that can be done to confirm the presence of the gas mentioned in question 5.3. Guys, we've got to remember that the gas that is produced here is oxygen. And guys, we've done this in grade 8 and 9, and we know that when we insert a glowing splinter, it glows brighter or it reignites, and that is a positive test for the presence of oxygen. Guys, we've had an amazing lesson interacting with photosynthesis and revising that. I trust that you've been enlightened by the lesson and that you have enjoyed the interaction. For me, it's bye. See you soon. Have a bye-lekker day. Cheers.